Hello everybody, and welcome to a really important conversation that we're going to have today around entrepreneurial thinking, a mindset. My name is Susan HayesCulleton, and I'm delighted to be here to host this conversation where we are going to think about how entrepreneurs think differently, and when they act differently, that all of those around them, how it can lead to the world looking and feeling to be a different place for the betterment of all. Now, during this WE Support Panel conversation, we are going to look at how particularly women entrepreneurs apply that type of a mindset to their ideas and to their businesses and moving forward. Now, I'm somebody that has been in business for over 10 years, and in preparation for today's conversation, and before I introduce you to two fantastic female entrepreneurs, I am going to talk to you about how I have thought a little bit differently over the years. So for example, the first thing is that I think entrepreneurs are really good at challenging assumptions. They look at the way the world works and questions why. Or, even more accurately, they question why not do things differently. Whether that is to deliver a different outcome, whether it is to harness different ideas, or whether it is to think, can it be done more productively with less expense, or with a way that we can bring people together with a different perspective to do things differently and better than ever before. But the other thing that I think entrepreneurs do really well is they always put their customer at the core and think, for this set of people, how could we deliver value? And how can I amass resources around that idea so that that idea can be delivered in such a way that's accessible to the customer, brings value to the customer, and here's the kicker, in such a way where the customer is willing to part with money, where the value of that outcome is more than the money that they're going to spend on it. And that's what entrepreneurs have to do. They have to look at ways to deliver outcomes in such a way that they can resource them to then either deliver a profit or deliver some outcome like that. And the third thing I want to tell you about an entrepreneurial mindset is this. And it's one that's very close to my heart and has got me through a lot of maybe more tedious and tougher times, is that I think entrepreneurs see opportunity in everything. Let me give you an example. I have been through the process of applying for an innovation partnership, for example. I've also been through the process of applying for the New Frontiers programme. Before it was called New Frontiers, it was a different name at the time. I have been through applying for innovation vouchers. I have been through applying for awards. I was not successful naturally in them all, and I was successful in some of them. However, apart from the outcome of the result of any of those, I always saw the application form in its own way being a form of free consultancy. Because when you're asked around what are your milestones over the next 5 years, what makes you different, what value have you got to bring to the market, what are your plans financially over the next 3 years, they're really good questions to ask. And they're great questions to ask of yourself and of your team. So that is also what I have done. Instead of seeing a 27-page application form thinking, oh my God, this has put a barrier between me and an outcome, I see that barrier, as other people might see it, as actually part of the journey. I see every conversation that I have with people, independent of their age and their stage, as potential market research. I see every interaction that we have, whether it's on social media, with the people that we meet, with the audiences that we have, or with the client book that we have, as potentially instructive towards future opportunities to come. And that's really exciting along the way. So on that note, I'm going to, now that I've finished setting the scene, we're now going to turn over and we're going to have a conversation with two fantastic, as I say, female entrepreneurs who have been superb at applying an entrepreneurial mindset. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all introduce you to our first person. Her name is Julie Currid and she is from Zutec. And now, Julie, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for that, Susan. I'm delighted to be here today, particularly as the event is being run by TU Dublin, and I am a former student myself, although it is a long time ago now. And I'll talk through that. One of the points just to touch on that you were delving into yourself regarding entrepreneurs thinking differently. One thing that I would reflect on myself is that entrepreneurship in itself is quite accessible, and it can come about organically. And entrepreneurs are not superheroes or not massively different to anybody else. I suppose if you did some psychometric assessments, we're probably more comfortable with risk. We're probably quite resilient, but my opinion is that those characteristics are not something that is inaccessible to pretty much everybody out there. I think Ireland is probably the perfect example of a country that, because our own domestic market is quite small, it causes a need for entrepreneurs to become global entrepreneurs or international entrepreneurs, and it causes the kind of source need for entrepreneurs in the first place to create the products that we need locally and to then find the markets for them internationally, which you don't see in every country. And particularly when you look at the most recent times that we've been through, we'll probably see quite an explosion of entrepreneurship in Ireland. So I think that kind of goes to prove the point that it is something that can come about in an organic way, doesn't have to be prescribed or manufactured. And so just to go back to how I found myself as an entrepreneur and to talk through that, because I suppose, it is something that I had in the back of my mind, even when I was attending TU Dublin, that, I would like to own and run my own company at some point in the future. But I wasn't doggedly chasing that. I knew that I had a path that I had to follow myself. I had experience that I had to gain myself, and that's what I did. And when the time was right, then I kind of jumped in with 2 feet. So back in 2000, I started a degree in management and marketing in TU Dublin. I spent a year of that in Germany, and I spent 6 months of that working in bank. And I then left in 2004 and went on to go straight into a marketing role, doing kind of promotions for various radio stations around Ireland. And then I got into another kind of marketing role, which was food related for a Belgian food company. And I got some great exposure to kind of international B2B marketing. And then I could see that there was a bit of a phase going on in Dublin at the time when it came to technology. I could see that the Irish government were doing a lot to attract a good bit of FDI in terms of the Googles and the Facebooks of the world. And that was creating quite the positive environment for potential entrepreneurs and all kind of Irish tech companies. So I thought, look, there's something in this, and I wanted to make a transition myself into software or technology in some shape or form. So I jumped into a company that were offering online safety training in the form of e-learning, and that was kind of a B2B type of sales and marketing role that expanded fairly rapidly in Ireland. And I then went over to London and did a bit of work for them over there, and realized that there was quite a strong market for contractor safety and contractor management. So what that means is, you're in a high-rise building, and this particular scenario actually happened to me, being in a high-rise building in the middle of London, speaking to a safety manager, and next thing somebody comes down the outside of the window on their harness, cleaning the windows, and the safety manager is saying to me, look, that person is my responsibility, but I don't have the documentation to hand. I wasn't expecting them on site today. I don't have complete visibility over the management of that person coming onto site. And that makes me feel exposed and uncomfortable. And I'm sure there's a piece of software that could help me with that. So look, that was kind of the absolute eye-opener for me that, okay, there's something in this, and a bit more market research, and myself and my business partner at the time thought there absolutely is something in this. The market is telling us that they're all feeling the same way, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in Ireland. And And so we set up what was called at the time Induction Manager, and has since become Go Contractor. And at the time, I was in my late 20s, and it was not a huge decision for me to make. I didn't have dependents. I didn't have a huge amount of risk to take by jumping into this. My business partner, meanwhile, had a family, and, it was probably a bigger decision for him to make, but he decided that the opportunity was great enough to make that decision, and that I suppose myself and himself had the capability to turn it into a successful business. So we went away and we scoped out a product, and I suppose just to also kind of reflect on my initial messages that it was the opportunity that really presented itself with the background, probably experience that I built up. But the opportunity had to be there, and the business partner was right at the time. So it wasn't just this kind of, straight out of college, I want to start a company, and going straight for that as being my number one path that I had to follow. So, we started the company. We were absolutely bootstrapping it. We built a piece of software for $5,000 at the time. It was, a kind of a contractor management, gathering documentation and doing a bit of training online and a bit of testing of the contractors, and then they'd be given access to a site. And it hasn't massively changed since then in terms of, the benefit really to the companies that buy the product is that they've got complete transparency over who's on site, when they're on site. If something happens, they know, they have a live view of what's going on, rather than it just being their direct employees. They can see all of their contractors as well. And you can see how that fits in perfectly with construction, given that the construction industry is pretty much all contractor driven. So that's where Go Contractor really focuses in all of its marketing and sales efforts is towards the construction industry. And during the journey, something that myself and Sean, my business partner, were good at was really, I suppose, pointing our efforts across different markets in order to assess which ones were going to be the right ones to focus on. So the way that we did that was we had 20 salespeople at one point in the Dublin office, and we had them spending a certain number of hours of every day across different markets, right across the MEA, North America. And we were able to assess then off the back of the hours spent, and obviously, discounting for performance of salespeople, etc. We were able to say that these particular markets were creating a certain amount of pipeline or deals for us that ultimately turned into customers. And we were able to say from all of that research that actually, Europe is probably not where it's at for us, but North America is where it's at, particularly in the States. So throughout the journey, we added customers, some big name construction companies, and then we brought on some funding. We brought Enterprise Ireland on board, who were a massive support, and we brought on local Irish VCs and private investors. So there is a stakeholder management piece throughout the journey, which is making sure that everybody is comfortable with the communication that they're getting, that everybody is comfortable with the roles that they have within the company. So whether that is employees, customers, investors, that you're kind of ticking all of the boxes. So as a co-founder, the role is incredibly diverse at times. As I look back on it and having moved on from the company now, you are the person that knows how to fix the printer as well as being the person who's driving the vision and the strategy of the company. So you're pulled in a lot of different directions. You're juggling a lot of balls at once. And look, that's kind of the appeal of it in a lot of ways as well. So, one meeting might be recruitment, another meeting might be a board meeting, you might be bringing on new investors. Every day is completely different and it's incredibly exciting. And the exposure, I think, that you get then to other entrepreneurs that are grappling with the same issues that you have. And as I've said before, I think Ireland is particularly strong with that. I would have had a really strong support network in Going for Growth over the years, and kind of relied heavily on that. And then the EY Winning Women program as well was quite strong for me. And I suppose then to just kind of go back to where the company is now. So we scaled it into the States. It was very successful for us. We brought on some US investors, full kind of development, marketing, sales, customer success team, the whole shebang. Brought on US investors and pretty much flipped the company to being what's called a Delaware Inc., meaning that it's now a US company, and is very much US centric. 80% of revenue coming out of the US. So when all of that happened, I had spent a year in New York at the time, and I decided to pull back a little bit and move back to Dublin and start a family, etc. So have since kind of moved on from the company, but remain a shareholder as it continues its journey into the US, and my business partner remains in the company. And from there, I have stayed in construction tech. I now work for a company called Zutec, and I'm their chief marketing officer. And in that, with that hat on, I am focused very heavily on everything marketing, whether that's events management, whether it's digital marketing, campaign management, etc., SEO, SEM. And it's quite a change from the diversity of what I was doing before, but it's no less challenging. And Go Contractor, in my view, has given me the opportunity to transition into roles at that level where I'm still at a strategic management level. My voice is still very influential when it comes to deciding where the company is going. And I think the experience that I gained through the 8 years of co-founding and scaling Go Contractor probably offered me the opportunity to go into that role. And then, just kind of reflecting on something else that Susan said at the very beginning, which is just the customer centricity of entrepreneurs. So I would totally agree with that. And I think that Go Contractor is a company that has benefited from having had a marketing person there from the very beginning. My skill set was applied through the entire marketing, through the entire customer experience, so that, knowing that the effect that it has on a customer and their stickiness, and, whether they come back for renewal the following year, whether they're going to go and tell somebody else that you're great, whether they're going to give you a case study or a testimonial, that having all of that from the very beginning allowed us to create all of the material that was required. It allowed us to have really strong results in terms of our year-on-year growth and our low churn of customers. So these are the kind of metrics that investors really care about. And having that customer centricity really, I suppose, allowed us to shine a light on that from the very beginning. And then the final point really that Susan touched on, that there being an opportunity in everything. Absolutely agree with that. I mentioned that there's kind of a grit or a resilience in entrepreneurs, and that just comes from, I've put a huge amount into this. I'm not going to let it fail, and it's a rocky road for pretty much everyone. I don't think that there's an entrepreneur out there that has had an easy journey. as Susan mentioned, she won some, she lost some, exactly for us. And it almost feels like if you lose a customer, or if you don't win a deal, that you take it very personally. And there is a sense of, well, that actually, by taking it personally, it means that you're better at it the next time, and you can apply all of those learnings. And if you think of, a founder-led company, and a founder having so much skin in the game, and taking it to heart so much, it probably results in higher standards than it being completely, employee driven, and not actually having the founders in the company anymore. I think you can continuously improve and really put a whole lot of heart into that, by keeping the founders there for as long as possible. So yeah, look, that is kind of where I am today. It's been a fantastic journey. It's probably one that I will jump back into at some stage in the future. I see myself having a long career ahead of me, and I'm just really grateful to have had the opportunity to do it already, and to be a part of Go Contractor and its scaling story. So thank you very much for the opportunity to chat today as well.
Thank you, Julie. Wow, that story has literally taken you right around the world, and on such a wide-ranging journey as well. What I really like about what you said there is that it sounds like that business that you co-founded was actually sandwiched in between two sides of another type of a career. So you talked about the business development and the marketing and all of those skills that you got in your job before you co-founded the business. Then there was the business and the 8 years of it all. And now how you are CMO in a new business. And of course, you also mentioned that you wouldn't rule out starting again. So I think that that's interesting, because for anybody who's looking today, entrepreneurship can be an entire career in itself, or it can be part of a career as we go along the way. But the point is that the skills that you can learn either from a job can be transferred in, or during entrepreneurship can be transferred out. The second thing is, thank you for picking up on my point about you can see opportunity everywhere. And I was struck by the term that you used when you saw that construction worker, and you said it was a real eye-opener. Sometimes ideas can come to us in the most unexpected ways, but if you keep your eyes open, and generally entrepreneurs are just built that way, you really can see a way that possibly could change the way of doing business or living or working forever. And also, what I'm particularly struck by as well is that you mentioned that during that, having the 20 people in the sales office in Dublin, is that you said you looked at different markets to try out which ones could deliver, as you said, the most pipeline and deals. I think when I discovered that being an entrepreneur to a large degree is about trying and learning. Sometimes we call that failing. Okay, we can call it for whatever word you want. But the point I'm making is that we don't have to get everything right. Just as long as either we get more right than we get wrong, or when we get it right, we win bigger than when we lose, that's okay. And in fact, that's where innovation can go, and where entrepreneurial thinking can delve right into that mindset. So thank you very much indeed for that, Julie. It's a story that can teach so many so much. And on that note, I'm now going to hand you over to our second speaker today, another fantastic entrepreneur who's going to tell us her story, and that is Aisling Kirwan from Positive Carbon. Aisling, the floor is yours.
Hi, Susan. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks for TU Dublin for having me speak today. So I can run through a bit of my journey of how I got to the point that I'm at now. It started quite a while ago when I've always been very interested in the environment and sustainability. It's what drove me to originally study science in Trinity. I then decided to specialize in biochemistry rather than sustainability. Is something that I still to this day would wish I'd gone the other way. But once I had finished biochemistry and I realized I didn't want to pursue a career in that format, I really, really wanted to focus on climate change. I saw it as one of the biggest threats that we were going to be facing as a society, and I wanted to try and make some impact in it that I possibly could. The only problem is when you look at something like climate change and it's just seems so giant and insurmountable that it can be difficult to understand where to start. But it was from that point that I was lucky enough to get a fantastic opportunity to be an intern at Food Cloud when they were in their very early days. So there was about 5 of us, 6 of us in a small office in Dublin where I started there. And that was fantastic for me because now I was able to focus my efforts. I wanted to work on something in climate change, and food waste is a very good place to start. It's an absolutely massive problem. And I learned about the extent of how bad the problem was working at Food Cloud. So 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from food waste. So that is 5 times the amount of greenhouse gases that come from the airline industry. So I think when people think about climate change, they think, well, we need to stop flying, or their kind of personal contribution there. But food waste is actually such a bigger problem overall that it was great to be working on something that I really thought I could make an impact in. So I worked in Food Cloud for many, many years. By the time I was leaving, we had moved from that small office to, there was 3 locations around Ireland. I had been on the team that helped it expand into Australia. There was other teams working on getting across all of Europe. So it was an absolute huge operation when I was leaving. I then moved to Australia to work with one of Food Cloud's clients there. And my role there was to bring food waste reduction solutions to areas within Australia that they'd never worked in before. So they're working in, the very large cities like Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, and it was my role to bring it to the smaller towns and cities that you may not have heard of in Australia before, but I think I know every small town across that continent now. So working there for a year, that was fantastic. And then myself and my co-founder, Mark, got the opportunity to go to Chile to work on a food waste initiative there. It was a very exciting opportunity. We were absolutely delighted to take it up. However, we were there for about 4 weeks before the pandemic struck, and we were strongly advised by the Irish Embassy to get home. So we caught the second last flight out of the country and got back to Ireland a little over a year ago. And from there, once we were back in Ireland, we just wanted to focus on the problem of food waste within Ireland. So we'd already been working for a very long time with food retailers. And although food retailers buy in millions of euros worth of food every year, their food waste is only between 1% and 2%. And it's because they have really, really detailed data on their food waste. Everything they buy in is scanned. Everything that's sold to customers is scanned out. Everything that's wasted is scanned out. So they have this line by line data of everything that's wasted in the store. And then anything that is surplus, they have fantastic organizations like Food Cloud where they can redirect that food anyway. So we really wanted to look at areas that were being underserviced in this area. So just during research, we realized the biggest wasters of food was the food service industry, and then more specifically hotels. So although a food retailer may waste 1% to 2%, a hotel can waste between 10 and 30%, depending on their processes. So you're talking about just massive amounts of food waste in an area where there wasn't a solution for monitoring their food waste and reducing it. So we spent the first few months, it was just all research. I was speaking to any chef or general manager that would speak to me. One of the small upsides we had from the pandemic was that there's these people who are normally, working 60, 70-hour weeks and wouldn't have a second to talk to you, suddenly had a bit of free time and were incredibly generous with their time. So I spoke to general managers that I know I never would have gotten a meeting with in ordinary times. So there was that kind of opportunity for us to learn a lot in that setting. So the problem is when we're speaking to chefs is that food waste occurs from so many different sources and across so many multiple teams that it can just be difficult to get full visibility on it. So if they knew what they're wasting and why they're wasting it, they would be able to make changes to their kitchen preparation and operations to stop that waste. So that's what we wanted to give them. We wanted to give them that full visibility. So what we did was we started with, if we wanted to capture the weight of the food, you start with the scales, right? So we created the solution where we had a very large scales that a bin could sit on. It had a 7-foot stick coming out of it and then a camera on top of it. So now we were able to capture the weight of the food and a picture of the image of the food, and we're able to label that food through AI. So this would now give that full visibility of that food waste to the customer. So we were very excited about that. However, I think you can already see where this is going. We were working with absolutely huge equipment. It was heavy. It wasn't conducive for getting around in a kitchen, trying to move it into a place even. There were 40 kilos. My co-founder dropped it on his foot one day. It was a nightmare to work with. So we really wanted to move away from that model and streamline a solution that would work in a cramped, hot, busy kitchen all of the time. So it was during one of the tightest lockdowns. All pilots had stopped. We weren't trying to get more conversations going. We just focused on product and our tech. And I can't really take much credit for this. It was definitely on my co-founder. He's in charge of tech, but he managed to come up with our new solution, which is this. So much more convenient than a very large scales in a kitchen. It's only the size of a fire alarm, and it can sit above the bin. It uses a special type of laser to now get the volume and the weight of the food. And then there's a camera then there as well that can take an image of the food. So we have taken our product from a 40-kilo giant contraption down into this device that can be held in your hand. So it's just so much more convenient for the customers that we're working with, and it was a huge step forward for us. Long before we got to this point, we were still working with our scales. We were lucky enough to work with New Frontiers, and that gave us a lot of support as we were building the product and working through these problems and where we wanted to go. We then got CSF investment from Enterprise Ireland, and that was a huge lifeline for us. Came with a lot of also expertise and us trying to build our product and do that market research as well. And now where we are, we have completed pilots with our hotels. We're releasing our case studies now, and we're rolling out to a number of customers across Dublin, and we're moving into other counties soon as well. We have our big exciting news, I suppose, is that we've just secured backing from a German VC, and we'll be looking to close off our seed rounds by the end of the year, and we'll be using that to mostly just for expansion to get this out as many places as we can, reduce as much food waste as we can, and reduce the impact on the planet for those businesses. And I suppose just to kind of wrap it up on that whole journey that I've gone through, is that I think it can sound a bit, when you're describing it from start to finish, it can sound a bit extraordinary or overwhelming, but it very much reflects on what Julie was saying as well, that it's all very achievable. I think anything with entrepreneurship, it's about seeing a problem, seeing if you can fix it, and then believing in what you're working on and your product. And as long as you keep pushing forward, the rest will follow. I think even last year, we couldn't imagine that we'd be in the position where we are now, when we're rolling out with customers, revenue coming in, and we are going to be working with quite a large German investor. It's all very exciting. But that has all come from us addressing a problem that our customers needed, building the product based on their feedback on what will work for them, and then just continuing plugging away. So even times when it's incredibly stressful and you want to throw in the hat, just keep going. Because if it's the right fit, everything else will just follow. Well, thanks for having me today and to bring you through our journey. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you, Aisling, for that. Wow, what a story. And not just a story about your own journey, but actually there was a real education element to that as well, all around climate change and food waste in particular. A couple of things really stood out to me. And the first one was that feeling of, how do I do something about climate change, which feels giant and potentially insurmountable? And particularly, you said, where do I start? Now, to all of you looking today, believe me, a lot of us feel like that at the beginning. You might feel really passionate about doing something to do with health or education or food or technology, and you're not quite sure, like, where do I start and how can I get the resources together and how can I actually have an impact? The thing is, that's where a lot of people, that's the exciting place where a lot of people start. So rather than feel put off by that, be put on by that, and then just start thinking, right, what small steps can I take in this direction? And talk to people who've taken on those really big challenges and ask them what was their path forward. At the end of the day, if you can see someone else do it, it will always inspire you about how you can take your own path. The second thing I want to pick up on is indeed that perception around, let's say, air travel versus food waste. What you're doing is going to have, and already has had, a really, really big impact. And it's not just about food waste is creating all these carbon emissions and all of the impact that you mentioned, but of course food waste is a business problem. The thing is that you're taking an impact and a business idea that can work profitably and put the two of them together. They're two really big trends. We always obviously want to see business succeed, but there's also a big challenge around sustainability in the environment as well. So again, I would say that to people watching is, what do you see going on in the world around you? And what are the key trends that may be affecting literally every person or every business or a sector of a business, etc.? What problem are they facing and how can you help them solve it? That is an entrepreneurial mindset for sure. And also the third thing, what I love is just how you do, and I didn't know you were going to say it, you challenge the assumptions. What started off as a 40-kilogram weighing scales that your co-founder dropped on his foot has turned into something that is from above, looking down, a nifty piece of technology using artificial intelligence and a variety of other things. Is that yes, you had a potential solution, but you kept challenging your assumptions along the way. And of course, congratulations with your announcement around the VC. Who knows where this innovation journey is going to bring you. But that is, what you've really done there is that you've really brought into focus what entrepreneurial thinking does. What that mindset does is that it challenges, it finds solutions, and it sees opportunity in so many ways. So on that note, I'm now going to bring both of our speakers back in. So Julie from Zutec, as well as Aisling from Positive Carbon. Great, I can see you're both up there now on my screen. So can I start off by asking you, how do you feel about the theme of our conversation today? What was your initial reaction? Julie, I might go to you first. Entrepreneurial thinking, a mindset. What does that mean to you?
So in my view, Susan, having an entrepreneurial mindset is something that is learned rather than something that you're born with. And I'm sure that's probably up for a challenge, but and I can only go by my own experience. But along the way, I was exposed to a lot of business speak as a child, and exposed to my mum working as I was a kid, my dad working. And I remember my dad being one of the first people to have a mobile phone in the car, and I'd be in the back and I'd be able to hear all the conversations that he'd be having. And it was just something that was part of our family life all the time, So I was kind of exposed to business a lot. And then there was a number of different role models that kind of came along throughout my life. And one of them that was quite strong, and I'm going to say it was about 2008 or so. So it would have been about 4 years before I started Go Contractor, was Marianne O'Brien, who started Lily O'Brien's. And I was working for Puratas, which is a Belgian food company at the time. I was their marketing manager, and she was a customer of ours. And so we were out for dinner and there was loads of people around, and I kind of took the opportunity to grab a seat beside her for dinner and just, I suppose, put myself in the cold face and really, kind of took the opportunity to have that conversation with her. And she was just amazing, an absolute bundle of energy, her story of how she started the company. And I just thought, yeah, I want to be like that. I want to point my efforts in a similar direction. I want to own my own company, and I want to feel as passionate as she does about owning my own company. So, I suppose having those kind of role models along the way makes a massive difference, and I got a good bit of exposure to that along the way. So, yeah, I certainly think that entrepreneurship is something that you kind of develop, and it's everybody's journey, and it's very different. It hits you at different ages, so yeah, and you might dip in and dip back out again and whatnot.
And the great thing, Julie, by the way, I've met Marianne O'Brien and her husband, Jonathan Irwin, and they're a fantastic team. And of course, they've applied that prowess not just to business, but to charity as well, through Jack and Jill and so on. And they're a great team. And she's great crack as well. But what I do think as well is that in Ireland, we have a growing body of women entrepreneurs, including both of your good selves along the way, so that, future generations and current generations as well can really get inspiration from that growing body. What's your own thoughts on this, Aisling? An entrepreneurial thought process. What sort of mindset do people go through? What's been your experience of this?
I am not only not going to challenge you, Julie, I'm going to completely agree with you that I think it is it's something that can be learned and developed and improved along the way. I do think there are some people who are, depending on different traits, maybe a bit more built for it. I think someone like my co-founder is always going to be he was always going to be an entrepreneur, absolutely no matter what. He's very determined, and he's always was going to be in that role. I, however, never saw myself as an entrepreneur. And it wasn't until we were working on food waste and we just saw this giant gap that we wanted to be working on. So although I knew I was always going to work in something sustainable, rather than just work for another company, why not start one, and then you can get on more people to work with you and expand and make as much big impact as you possibly can. At that stage, I knew if I wanted to make as big an impact as I could, starting my own business is the greatest impact I could make on that front. I completely agree that it's a mindset of something you develop as you go. And to look at myself now compared to a year and a half ago, I wouldn't even recognize myself. And I think a lot of it is, again, another point that Julie made that was actually fantastic, is that I think there are entrepreneurs out there who want to put themselves on a pedestal, and they're here because they are born great and they're geniuses and there was only ever going to be them. But an awful lot of entrepreneurship it's people doing things. You do things every day and you progress, and hopefully it all goes well and you can keep going for as long as you possibly can. But it's a mindset. It can be learned, and if you're passionate about what you're doing, you can just keep going and improving.
And that's the root of it, isn't it? It's that passion and wanting to make a difference. It's lovely to hear you say that I'm recognizable from a year and a half ago, because again, from personal experience, entrepreneurship is something that can bring you on a very steep learning curve. Julie, I'd like to bring you back in again on just something there that Aisling said, is that she says you learn as you go. And when she talks about the difference in her over that period of time, well, we often hear entrepreneurs talking about getting to the next level. Now, you're somebody that has done that, and also in your own story, you shared about how you needed to take a step back and move back to Ireland. You had been in New York, you started a family, etc. What do you think getting to the next level is?
Before I touch on that, I should also just point out that starting a family does not mean that you have to take a step back, and it's probably a terrible message for me to be giving at a female entrepreneurship event. So I would say, that was absolutely not the reason or the core reason. I wanted to move back to Ireland, and the company was very US centric. In terms of, I suppose, bringing it to a new level, it kind of links into some of the stuff that Aisling was saying there, which is just, a lot of it is just the day to day, and you don't kind of wake up one day and you're on the next level. You look back a year later and you say, wow, I've been pitching to VCs for a couple of months, and a year ago I would have been shaking in my boots pitching to VCs. And then you meet them and you realize actually they're human and they're a bit of crack as well. And they're actually, once they come on board, I don't know what Aisling's experience has been so far, but us in Ireland, we found VCs to be massively supportive and really full of great advice and knowledge, because they're dealing with loads of other companies that have been through the journey. So a lot of the networks, you're kind of surrounded by peers that are just on the journey, and they haven't necessarily been through the difficult stages or the exit stages, or the point in which you're running out of cash and you don't know if you're going to make payroll, So it's having VCs in the background that are kind of there to say, calm down, we got this. There's enough proof there to say that the business is on the right road, and we're very supportive. Look, that would probably be one of the things that outwardly looking in, that people would say, oh, that's a certain level to achieve, or maybe, expanding into the States and trying to sell to a totally different market and to try and localize a product to a different market. Maybe that's another level. But again, it's piece by piece. You don't go in kind of saying, look, we're superheroes, we can do this overnight. It's, let's bite off a small chunk of the market. Let's look at, New York initially, or the tri-state area initially, and see, is there a potential here if we place ourselves here, if we develop relationships? And again, the kind of Irish card, a lot of the initial relationships that we would have developed, particularly around the New York area, was off the back of, I went out and joined a camogie team. And met a load of people that way, and met a load of construction people that way. So it was right in the core of where I needed to be. But all of the Irish networking groups over there, they're just so forthcoming with introductions and with potential customers, and just really wanting you to do well. And I think that's kind of the Irish way, really, internationally. So yeah, I wouldn't say that there's ever a point in time that I said, yeah, I really jumped it up a particular level. It was just day-to-day grind, really, and trying to achieve what was required for that day.
And you know what I'm envisioning in my mind as you're saying that is, when you go onto an escalator and you're starting off and it's completely flat, and then as it moves up a little bit, then it turns into a step. That's actually what it probably is that you have the daily grinder, day by day you're moving on, and then you realize when you look back, actually, I'm a step higher than I was at the beginning. And that probably happens multiple times. So I really like your answer on that. Aisling, we often think of the word problem with a negative connotation. However, it seems like you don't, that you take a look at the problems that are in the world, one big one in particular, and see how you deal with them. So to people who maybe inherently, and maybe they don't even know that they see the word problem through a negative lens, or maybe, with a barrier or in some sort of a connotation that is problematic. What's your take on problems and how do you approach them?
Yeah, I think maybe when I was younger, I used to get a bit more overwhelmed by the idea of, especially climate change is a problem. But I think it's just being realistic about what you can do every day on these things. So yeah, I think what's that expression that every problem is an opportunity? And that's definitely where starting at a problem is a really, really good point, especially for your customers. So it's the idea of that you could, if you envision what the problem is and then you throw something out to a customer, you could be building something completely in the dark. I think that for ourselves, I would consider myself an expert in food waste, but in a grand scheme of food waste. I'm not an expert when it comes to food waste within a kitchen. That's not me to decide exactly how a kitchen should operate when they're dealing with food waste. So it is just identifying the problem overall of food waste, but then using your customers to find out how to solve that problem is the best way to tackle it. And that's what we spent many, many months doing. That's how we ended up going away from this initial solution that we had, which ended up becoming a problem for us, because when we were trying to get it into a hotel, it was absolutely a nightmare. It became a tripping hazard. It was filthy. So you're constantly coming up against all of these things that could be challenges or could be problems. And it's just working through them together as your team, as you develop. But most essentially, and this would be my most important point to get across, is it's always should be based on what your customers need and want. If you just continue to try and solve a problem in your bubble of what you think the best solution is, you're going to end up building something that absolutely nobody wants to use. You need to always be improving and implementing changes and features based on what a customer wants and needs for their particular problem.
I mean, customer centricity, it's the name of the game, because that is what entrepreneurial thinking is all about, is what problem does a customer have, or alternatively, what value can I bring that could make their life better, and building it around there. So you're totally right. As we bring our conversation to a close, I've one last question for both of you. And Julie, can I go to you first? You're somebody that went from a job into a business, and perhaps there are people who are watching today, maybe they're students, or maybe there are people who are in existing jobs, and they're thinking, like, how do I know when I'm qualified or when I have the appropriate skill set in order to become an entrepreneur? What would you say to that?
It would be quite difficult to say. And I think if you're asking that question, it's probably quite telling, because, there's no qualification to becoming an entrepreneur. I think that if you're hungry enough to fix a particular problem, like if you think of, Aisling's business as an example, like it's so pressing for her to solve or in some way contribute positively to climate change, that she just can't help but get into it. And likewise with my own story, it was that I could see the opportunity. The opportunity was too great to pass up. So it's kind of looking at it from that perspective to say, look, the qualifications and all of that, there's things that you need to be able to do. You need to be able to write a business plan, but you're going to figure it all out as you go. So there's nobody going in there that's amazing at any of it, because you are required to be, if it's software, like I had to write product specifications as though I was a technologist and I had no clue what I was talking about. And I had to, hire a CTO as though I had a clue what I was talking about, or hire people in sales, or, in various roles, and then lead them. And you learn all of this as you go. You're never going to know what's required in a year or 2 years' time. It's really just preparing yourself for the next day and for the next week. So I think, searching for a qualification, you're probably always going to be searching. It's about just being hungry enough and saying, okay, look, I got to take the leap here, or not. In some cases, it maybe if you don't feel that hungry towards it, maybe you're more suited towards working within a company that is solving the same problem.
What's really jumping out at me, Julie, is that you're pointing out the difference between, I'm going to solve climate change, or I'm going to sell a business for 100 million, or I'm going to do insert the BHAG, as it can be called, the big, hairy, audacious goal. And literally the difference between what is the reality, which is every day I'm going to do something to move forward, and then someday that goal will have been achieved. It's the hunger will get you there, and the passion. I'm going to give you the last word in this, Aisling, because arising from that, of course, you have had a journey so far. And that hunger and that passion and that innovating and challenging assumptions, finding resources to build what you want to build, as well as, of course, always listening to the market. So what for you is next? With that same idea of, entrepreneurial thinking, what is your mindset now about the future?
I think to think about how much we've evolved in the last year, it's when we're setting out a roadmap for the future, it seems, we've given ourselves a lot of ambitious goals, and it's very exciting on that front. What's next to us is we will be securing our seed funding, moving into Europe and beyond. The big goal what we want to have is to have the most advanced food monitoring technology across Europe. And then the goal that will coincide with that for our own personal setup would be, removing 6 million tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. So very, very big goals. I think, though, having an entrepreneurial mindset is very important, especially, I think we've touched on a lot of these points already, but it's just not getting bogged down on the day-to-day, because you can have these very large goals that you want to look at, that you want to be in 6 years or 10 years time, but when you are chasing up that invoice or doing another Excel sheet for the 1,000 times, it can bog you down a bit. So it's to still remember the goals you're going for, that even when you are doing this mundane task, you're building towards something much, much more bigger and much more important. So just to always be progressing every day to the larger goal that you're looking for.
Well, on that note, I have to say both of you have done a fantastic job of truly not just embodying entrepreneurial thinking, but really documenting how to take on that mindset, but also how to coexist that mindset with, whether it's fear or doubt or uncertainty, but make it coexist with excitement and dynamism. And the two key things that I just would really love that people take away from this is something there that Julie said, and that is that sometimes you just can't not do it. I really do agree in that sometimes entrepreneurship chooses you as opposed to the other way around. I can certainly tie in with that feeling anyway. And the other key takeaway is just exactly as Aisling said, is that you can do and try and contribute towards that really big goal. And at the same time, yes, you may have spreadsheets and printers to fix and meetings to have and so on, but keep going on that every day, because you are getting closer and closer and closer to what that big goal could be. My sincere thanks to you all for tuning in and for being part of this WE Support panel. It has been such a joy to have a conversation with two entrepreneurs like this, because Julie and Aisling truly have made massive differences to themselves, to their teams, to the people around them, and as you can probably tell, there was so much more to go. So on that note, to Aisling Kirwan from Positive Carbon, as well as Julie Currid from Zutec, thank you very much indeed for being here. And to all of you entrepreneurs who are pursuing entrepreneurial thinking and mindset, every best wish.